In this video, I'm continuing to explain the semantics for propositional logic, and we are on to our next operator, which is the wedge operator. And we're going to start off by saying that wedge sentences will represent disjunctions. And disjunctions are statements that are maybe prototypically expressed using the word or. So a sentence like A wedge B of our formal language, we might think of as representing a statement like Al is home or Bob is there. Now let's proceed directly to the truth table definition of our wedge operator again. Just like that, wedge is a binary operator. So we're going to define the semantic value of our wedge statement in terms of two input semantic values. And once again, the possibilities are that both P and Q could be true. P and Q are our inputs. Both could be true. P could be true and Q false. The first one false and the second one true, or both false. And we're going to decide how to define the outputs for our wedge statement. But once again, we're not just picking this out of a hat here. We want our wedge statement to work in a way that represents the way this statement about Al and Bob works. And I think it's easiest to decide what we should assign the final row first, the row where both are false. And if, for example, we have a statement like Al is home or Bob is there, and both those things are false because neither of those guys is there, then clearly the statement that Al is home or Bob is there is false. So we want to define our output in that case to be false. Now let's proceed upwards to the next two rows on our truth table, where one of the inputs is false and the other one's true. And we're going to want to define our output for our wedge statement as true in both those cases, because it's an or statement, Al is home or Bob is there. If exactly one of those guys is there, then that's a true statement. So we're going to want to define the output as true there. When we get to the first row on our table, where both of the input sentences are true, we might want to pause for a second and think about this. If both of them are there, and I say Al is home or Bob is there, do we want to call that statement true, or do we want to call that statement false? And some people have a tendency to say we should call it false. What we're deciding on here is whether we're going to make our wedge represent an inclusive or an exclusive or. If we decide that the output will be true on the first assignment, then we're defining our wedge as an inclusive or. And if we decide that it would be false, we'll be defining our wedge as an exclusive or. Well, it's traditional to define the wedge as the inclusive or. That means that our truth table says that our wedge statement is going to be true as long as at least one of the two input values is true. You may be surprised by this decision, so let me take a second to defend it. There are some reasons why we'd rather define our wedge as an inclusive or. For one thing, if we have the inclusive or, it's easy enough to reduce the exclusive or to the wedge, that means inclusive or, the dot, and the tilde, three operators that we already have. If I want to say that either Al or Bob is there, but they're not both, well then that uses operators that we've already defined. And you notice how in English, I can make this clear that it's exclusive by using the conjunction, but, and then negation, not, and then both. And we could express that symbolically by putting A wedge B in parentheses, and then dot, tilde, and then A dot B in parentheses. So the exclusive or is reducible to the inclusive or and the other operators. It seems a bit strange that we would have a sentence like Al or Bob is there, but not both, if or already meant that it had to be exactly one of the two. In some cases, it does seem like what a person really means when they use or is that it's exactly one of the two things. But that doesn't necessarily work out systematically. In some cases, it would be strange to interpret the or that way. So for example, if you have a friend that comes over, and while you're talking and hanging out or whatever, they ask you if you have any coffee or tea. Say, your friend says, I'm thirsty and I would like some caffeine. Do you have any coffee or tea? So if or means exclusively one or the other, and you're like me and you have always coffee and tea at your house, what are you going to say? Are you going to say, no, I don't have coffee or tea because I have both coffee and tea? Well, first, that would be excessively nerdy and pedantic, right? But even worse than that, it's wrong. If you have coffee and you have tea and somebody says, do you have coffee or tea? The answer is yes. You say, yes, I do. In fact, I have both. So it seems like or includes the possibility that it could be both when you say that. Sometimes when someone says or, it's clear from the conversation that they mean one or the other but not both. Like when someone asks you if you want coffee or tea on an airplane, and it's sort of implied, even though they don't say it, that you can have coffee or tea, but you can't have both coffee and tea. They don't want to add that part all the time about and not both. And sometimes when you say or, it's clear from the topic that it can't be both. Like if I say that, well, Bob's either in Maine or he's in California. You know that doesn't include the possibility that he's in both places, but that has nothing to do with the word or. That's not because of the word or, that's because you can't be in Maine and California at the same time. So that explains why sometimes it seems like the word or is exclusive. We'll be understanding statements using or as being inclusive or and representing them with the wedge. So a statement like Al is home or Bob is there can be represented by A wedge B. So can the shortened version of that statement, of course. If you say Al or Bob is there, combining them into one subject. If you say Al or Bob is there. And you could say either Al or Bob is there or at Al's. When you have either, some people seem to think that that makes it more like an exclusive or, but really the main purpose of the word either is to help with ambiguity. It ends up being a grouping word. Let me explain what I mean. If you have a sentence like Al is there and Bob is there or Carl is there, just think about that sentence for a second. It's unclear what that sentence means. Does it mean this, that one thing is that Al is there, and then possibly Bob is there or Carl is there, but Al's there for sure? Or does it mean one of two possibilities is the case? Both Al and Bob are there, or the other possibility is Carl's there. If we use the word either, we can clear that up. We can say Al is there and either Bob is there or Carl is there. And that clearly means the first thing, that Al is there for sure, that's one thing, and then the either is almost like a left parenthesis, right? It means the rest of this either pairs up with this or, so that forms a group. So A and then dot in parentheses, B wedge C would represent that. Or we could put the either at the beginning of the sentence, and that would make it clear that it was the other thing. Either Al is there and Bob is there, or Carl is there. Again, the either sort of forms a left parenthesis, which ends right before the or, and we have A dot B in parentheses, wedge C. So in summary, we define the wedge to mean the inclusive or. It can represent statements using or synonymous statements, in fact both. And our truth table for the wedge says essentially that it's true as long as at least one of the inputs is true.